Hi guys, my mom made this video for you to study.
Good day, everyone. For this session, we will be talking about economic globalization, and our objectives are the following. At the end of this lesson, we are expecting that students must be able to state the definition fully what economic globalization is, and as well as internationalization. And second, explain how international monetary system emerged after the years of wars. And third is to assess the impacts of globalization and internationalization on products that most of the students use in their everyday lives. So, um, of course, we have to thoroughly understand what economic globalization is. So, we have to discuss different definitions and including its concepts and ideas as to what economic globalization really is. So there you go. Economic globalization is one of the three main dimensions of globalization and commonly found in academic literature, with the two others being the political globalization and also the cultural globalization, as well as the general term of globalization. Now, economic globalization involves a wide variety of processes, opportunities, and problems related to the spread of economic activities around the globe among every countries. So there have been many periods in which it occurred, mostly recently during the latter 19th century to World War I, and also the quarter of the century of World War II and the late 1960s towards the early 1970s up to the present time. So economic globalization generally refers to the widespread of the international movement of goods, capital, services, technology, and as well as information. So while economic globalization has been expanding since the emergence of transnational trade, it has actually grown, and it grows at an increased rate due to the improvements of the efficiency of long distance transportation, advances in telecommunications as well, and also the importance of information rather than the physical capital in the modern economy. So there is this massive development in science and technology as well. So in this slide here, this is actually an illustration that provides us with simpler terms of what economic globalization refers to: the increasing interdependence of world economies as a result of the growing scale of cross borders of commodities and services. So it's not just the commodities and services, but it also includes the flow of international capital as well as the wide and rapid spread of technology. So the rate of globalization has also increased under the framework of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, and also with the World Trade Organization, in which countries are actually gradually cut down trade barriers, and they are slowly opening up to the current accounts and also the capital accounts. So the recent boom has been largely supported by the developed countries integrating with the developing countries through the foregoing direct investments, and also through integrating and developing countries' direct investments. Another is through lowering costs of doing businesses, and as well as the reduction of trade barriers. And lastly, there are many cases in cross-border migrations also. So here, so that we will be able to fully understand how economic globalization transpires or took place, we have to trace a little bit of its history, because international commodity markets, labor markets, and capital markets make up the economic, they were responsible for making up the economy, and they were responsible for defining the economic globalization. So here, this is actually an illustration, and this illustration is a concept map. At the same time, it shows the timeline as to how economic globalization transpires, or as to how it took its place. Now, let us trace chronologically each phases, or each era of how economic globalization took place. So first, it started with the Silk Roads, that is during 1st century BC up to the 13th to 14th centuries AD. So what actually happened during this era? Well, people have been trading goods for almost as long as they've been around, but as of the 1st century BC, a remarkable phenomenon occurred, and for the first time in history, luxury products from China actually started to appear on the other edge of the Eurasian continent in Rome. So they got there by after being hauled for thousands of miles along the Silk Road. So trade had stopped being a local or a regional affair, and it started to become massive. It started to become global. So, however, that is not to say that globalization had started in earnest. Well, silk was mostly a luxury good. So, so were the spices at that time. So, spices that were added to the intercontinental trade between Asia and Europe. So as a percentage of the total economy, the value of these exports was tiny. Why? Because many middlemen were involved to get those goods to their destination. But the global trade links were already established, and for those involved in that particular trade, it was gold mine. Like they were really earning that much at that time. So from the purchase price towards the final sales price, the multiple went in the dozens. So the Silk Road could prosper in part because two great empires dominated much of the route. If a trade was interrupted, it was most often because of the blockade by the local enemies between Rome or enemies of the Chinese people, the enemies of China. So if the Silk Road eventually closed, as it did after several centuries, the fall actually of the empires had everything to do with it. And when it reopened, what happened is that, okay, it reopened in Marco Polo's late medieval time. And it was because the rise of a new hegemonic empire, which are the Mongols, took place. So it is a pattern, and we'll see throughout the history of trade, and it thrives when the nation protects it. However, it falls when they don't. Now, moving forward, let us talk about the after the Silk Road, let us now move forward to the spice routes, and that is during 17th to 15th century. What are the significant events during this time? Now, in this next chapter in trade, it happened thanks to the Islamic merchants, because as the new religion spread in all directions from its Arabian heartland in the 17th century, so did the trade. So the religion has massively spread, and there goes the trade as well. Now, the founder of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, was a famous merchant as well as his wife Khadija. Now, trade was thus in the DNA of the new religion and its followers as well. So, by the 19th century, Muslim traders already dominated Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade, but afterwards, they could be found as far east as Indonesia, and which over time became a Muslim majority country as far as in the west as Moorish Spain. So that's how it spread. Trade expanded because of the Islamic religion. Now, the main focus of the Islamic trade in those Middle Ages were spices. Okay, so unlike salt, spices were traded mainly by sea since the ancient times, but by the medieval era, they had become the true focus of international trade. So the chief among them were the cloves, the nutmegs, and also the maize from the fabled Spice Islands, and that is known as the Maluku Islands in Indonesia. They were extremely very expensive and extremely in high demand all over the globe and also in Europe, which I mean, particularly in Europe. So as with the salt, okay, they remained a luxury product, and so the trade remained relatively in the low volume, regardless of the fact that there is this extreme demand. Okay, again, it remained relatively in low volume because it remained as a luxury product, just like the salt. So globalization at that time still didn't take off. But the original belt, which is the sea route and the road, South Road between the East and the West, did now exist at that particular era. So moving forward, let us now talk about the age of discovery. Now, in the 15th to 18th century, okay, why is it known as the age of discovery? That is because during this time, truly global trade kicked off in the age of discovery. It was in this era, from the end of 15th century onwards, the European explorers connected East and also the West and accidentally discovered America. So, aided by the discoveries of the so-called scientific revolution in the fields of astronomy, mechanics, physics, and also shipping, the Portuguese, Spanish, and later the Dutches, and I sound like the Duchess, and the Dutch and the English first discovered, and then they subjugated and finally they integrated new lands in their economies. So the age of discovery definitely rocked the world. So the famous, or you could say it's infamous discovery, is that of America by Columbus, which all but ended pre-Columbian civilizations. But the most consequential exploration was rather the circumnavigation by Magellan, which had opened the door to the Spice Islands, cutting out the Arab and the Italian middlemen, while the trade once again remained small compared to the total GDP. It certainly altered people's lives, because potatoes, tomatoes, and coffee and chocolate were introduced in Europe, and the price of those spices fell steeply. Yet, during the time, the economist said today that it still don't truly regard this era as one of the true globalization. So regardless of the discoveries and regardless of the additional products that is being traded, economists today still do not truly regard this particular era as one of the true globalization. They said that trade certainly started to become global, and it had been the main reason for starting the age of discovery. However, the resulting global economy was still very much soiled and lopsided, and so the European empires set up their global supply chains. And then, however, when the European empire set up their global supply chains, but mostly with those colonies that they own. So moreover, their colonial model was chiefly one of exploitations, which means that it includes the shameful legacy of the slave trade. And the empire also created both a mercantilist and a colonial economy, but not a truly globalized one. So I hope you get the point there, why economists today do not truly regard this age of discovery as the era for one of a true globalization, because according to them at that time, it only resulted with the European setting empires of global supply, and it also resulted to colonies, and in which, when there was this colonial, when they were establishing their colonies, there is this colonial model, which was one chiefly of exploitation, because there was this legacy of slave trade. So there you go. So that's it. That's what the age of discovery is about. Let us now move forward to the first wave of globalization, and that is during 19th century to 1914. Okay, so sorry, double click. So what happened? What are the significant events that transpires during the first wave of globalization in the 19th century to 1914? Well, this started to change with the first wave of globalization, which roughly occurred over the century ending in 1914. By the end of the 18th century, the Great Britain had started to dominate the world, both geographically. How do they dominate the world both geographically? It is through the establishment of the British Empire, and also technologically with innovations like the steam engine and the industrial weaving machine and a lot more. So it was the era of the first industrial revolution. Now, the British Industrial Revolution it was made for a fantastic twin engine of global trade. On the one hand, the steamships and the trains could transport goods over thousands of miles, both without countries and okay. Please don't get confused. Oh, it's like this. There is this industrial revolution because there is this twin engine of global trade, and that is the steamships and the trains. Now, the steamships and the trains could transport goods over thousands of miles, both within countries and across other countries. So, on the other hand, in this industrialization, it allowed Britain to make products that were in demand all over the world, like the iron, the textiles, and also they manufactured a lot of goods that are very utilized among the people across the world or around the world. So with its advanced industrial technologies, the BBC recently wrote that looking back to the era, Britain was able to attack a huge and rapidly expanding international market. So the resulting globalization was obvious in numbers. For about a century, trade really grew on average 3% per year, and the growth rate propelled exports from a share of 6% of global GDP in the early 19th century to 14% on the eve of World War I. So again, from the growth rate propelled exports from the share of 6% only of the global GDP in the 19th century, it increases to 14% even during the war, during the eve or on the start of the World War I. So as John Maynard Keynes, the economist, observed, he said, the inhabitant of London could order by telephone, and they could order by sipping their morning tea in bed, the various products of the whole earth, and in such quantity as he might see fit, and reasonably expect their early delivery upon their doorsteps. So Keynes also noted a similar situation was also true in the world of investing. Those within the means in New York and in Paris, in London, or in Berlin could also invest in internationally active joint stock companies. So one of those, the French company, the Suez, constructed the Suez Canal, connecting the Mediterranean with the Indian Ocean, and it opened yet another artery of world trade. So others built railways in India, or others managed mines in Africa, or they also managed African colonies at the same time together with the mines. Now, foreign direct investments was also globalizing at this particular era. So while Britain was the country that benefited most from this globalization, as it had the most capital and it had the most of the technology, others did too, because they could afford to invest and also by exporting other goods. So the invention of the refrigerated cargo ship, or they call it reefer ship, during the 1970s, for example, it allowed for countries like Argentina and Uruguay to enter their golden age. So at that time, they started to mass export meat from the cattle grown on their vast lands, and other countries too, where they were starting to specialize their production in those fields in which they were most competitive. So, however, by the first wave of globalization and industrialization also coincides with the darker events. So what are these darker events that we were talking? Actually, by the end of 19th century, the Khan Academy notes that most globalizing and industrialized European nations grabbed for a piece of Africa. And by 1900, the only independent country left on that continent was Ethiopia. So in similarly negative vein, large countries like India, China, Mexico, or Japan were previously powers to reckon with, but they were not either not able or not allowed to adapt to the industrial and global trends. So either the Western powers put restraints on their independent development, or they were otherwise outcompeted because of their lack of access to the capital or because of their lack of technology. And finally, many workers in the industrialized nations also did not benefit from the globalization that took place at that time because their work commoditized by industrial machinery, or their output was undercut rather by the foreign imports. So as productive as it is, there were those productivity were also reciprocated with negativity. So there. Now let's move forward, in which the World War I has started. So what are the significant events that transpires during this period? Okay, World War started, so we have the World War I. No, in World War I, it was actually a situation that was bound to end in a major crisis, and it did in 1914. So the outbreak of World War I brought an end to just about everything the bourgeois and high society of the West had gotten used to, including globalization. So the ravage was complete, and millions of soldiers died in the battle. Millions of civilians died as collateral damage, and war replaced trade, and destruction replaced the construction, and countries closed their borders again. So it was a very dark era, because all the progress that globalization has brought to the world has been shone, if not totally shut. And in the years between the world wars, the financial markets, which were still connecting in a global web, caused by further breakdown of the global economy and its links as well. So the Great Depression in the US, to the end of the boom in South America, and a run on the banks in many other parts of the world. So another World War followed in 1939 to 1945. So by the end of World War II, trade as a percentage of world GDP had fallen to 5%. And a level of that one was not seen in more than 100 years. So there. Now, the story of globalization, however, was not actually over by the end of World War II. Why? Because it marked a new beginning for the global economy, and under the leadership of a new hegemonic country in the name of the United States of America, and aided by the technologies of the second industrial revolution, like the car, the plane, and also global trade started to rise once again. And at first, this happened in two separate tracks. So as the Iron Curtain divided the world into two spheres of influence, as of 1989, when the Iron Curtain fell, globalization became a truly global phenomenon. And in the early decades after World War II, institutions like the European Union and other free trade vehicles championed by the US were responsible for much of the increase in the international trade. So in the Soviet Union, there was also a similar market, and the effect was very profound. So worldwide, trade once again rose during 1914, and also in 1989, export was once again counted for 14% of the global GDP. So it was paired with a steep rise in the middle class income in the West. So the war has collapsed globalization. However, it has also brought back its beginning. And so let us move forward to the Bretton Woods agreement. So what is the Bretton Woods agreement about, and why is this significant when we talk about economic globalization? So what then is the Bretton Woods agreement? It's basically about the Bretton Woods system. So the Bretton Woods system of monetary management was established during 1945 and it ended until 1972. Now, this is a system of monetary management which established the rules for commercial and financial relations among the United States, Canada, Western European countries, Australia, and Japan after the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement. So the Bretton Woods system was the first example of a fully negotiated monetary order intended to govern monetary relations among the independent states. So the chief features of the Bretton Woods system were an obligation for each country to adopt a monetary policy that maintained its external exchange rates within 1% and also adopt a monetary policy that basically maintained its external exchange rates by 1% and by tying its currency to gold, and also the ability of the International Monetary Fund to bridge the temporary imbalances of payments. Also, there was this need to address the lack of cooperation among other countries and to prevent competitive devaluation of the currencies as well. So preparing to rebuild the international economic system while World War II was still being fought during that time, 730 delegates from all over 44 allied nations gathered at Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, United States, for the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, which is also known as the Bretton Woods Conference. So during the time, the delegates deliberated for 22 days, starting from July 1st to July 22nd, 1944, and then they signed the Bretton Woods Agreement on its final day. Now, setting up a system of rules, institutions, and procedures to regulate the international monetary system, these accords established the two very important institutions, which is the International Monetary Fund and also the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which today is a part of the World Bank Group. Now, the United States, which controlled 2/3 of the world's gold, insisted that the Britain system rests on both gold and also in the US dollar. So if you could see in this illustration here, that is what they have insisted on. And at the time, Soviet representatives attended the conference, but later they denied to ratify the final agreements. And then they were charging the US that the institutions that they had created were just branches of the Wall Street. And so these organizations became operational in 1945 after a sufficient number of countries had ratified the agreement. And on August 15, 1971, the United States unilaterally terminated and terminated the convertibility of the US dollar to gold, effectively bringing the Bretton Woods system to an end and rendering the dollar a fiat currency. And also at the time, many currencies such as the pound, sterling, the German mark, and the French franc also became free floating. So until then, when the wall dividing the East and the West fell in Germany and the Soviet Union collapsed, the globalization became an all-conquering force. So the newly created World Trade Organization encouraged nations all over the world to enter into a free trade agreements, and most of them actually did, including the many new independent countries. So in 2001, even China, which for the better part of the 20th century had been a secluded agrarian economy, became a member of the World Trade Organization and also started to manufacture for the world. So in this new world, the US set the tone and led the way for the many others to be benefited in their split stream. So it's not just that. At the same time, a new technology from the third world industrial revolution, the internet, connected people all over the world in an event, in an event that it is more in a very direct manner or in a very direct way. So the orders that Keynes could place by phone in 1914 could now be placed over the internet. And instead of having them delivered in a few weeks, they would be arriving at one's doorsteps in just a few days. So what was more was that the internet, the internet also allowed for a further global integration of one's chain. So it added the value of one's product, and it expanded. And at the same time, there is this further global integration of the value chain. So you could just do R&D in one country, and then you could be sourcing in another countries, and then it could be produced. There's this production in another country, and then there's this distribution all over the world. So the result has been a globalization in steroids. And so in the year 2000, the global exports reached a milestone as they rose to about a quarter of the global GDP. So in trade, the sum of the imports and the exports consequently grew about half of the world's GDP. So imagine that there is this massive growth when we talk about the economy, and it's not just the economy itself, but it is the global economy. So in some countries like in Singapore, Belgium, or others, trade is worth much more than 100% of the GDP. So a majority of the global population has greatly benefited from this. So more people than ever before belong to the global middle class, and hundreds of millions achieve that status by participating in the global economy. So that brings us to this slide here, which basically brings us today, when a new wave of globalization is once again upon us in a world increasingly dominated by two global powers, which is the US and China. Now, the new frontier of globalization is the cyber world. the digital economy in its infancy during the third wave of globalization is now becoming a force to reckon with through e-commerce, digital services, 3D printing. It is further enabled by artificial intelligence. However, it is threatened by cross-border hacking and cyber attacks. At the same time, a negative globalization is expanding too through the global effect of climate change. So I know that you could feel this one because pollution in one part of the world leads to extreme weather events in another country. So we have been greatly devastated by Yolanda, followed by Odette, and I know that you know already that we are suffering these effects of climate change and the cutting of forests in the few, and there is this green lands the world has left, like the Amazon rainforest, has a further devastating effect on not just the world's biodiversity, but its capacity to cope with the hazardous greenhouse gas emissions. So let's answer this question. Why do economies need money? And what is money? Why is it there is this huge necessity of money? So to answer that, let us tackle one question at a time. So what is money? Money defines as a unit of account that is used as a medium of exchange in transactions. So without money, individuals and businesses would have a harder time obtaining or purchasing or exchanging or even selling what they need, want, or make. So money provides us with a universally accepted medium of exchange. So however, before the current monetary system can be fully appreciated, else it is helpful to us to look back at the history and see how money and the systems governing the use of money have evolved. It is actually thousands of years ago that people had to barter if they wanted to get something. So bartering is giving one goods in exchange for another good. So if you are producing this particular goods and the others is in need of the good that you are producing, then you would just barter it. Okay, so that worked well if two people each wanted the other had. However, if you are already of the position of that thing that you needed, then there is no need for you to barter more. So that is why money existed. But however, even today, bartering still exists. Okay. In my younger days, when I was young, during my elementary years, there was this fad of stationaries, and so we used to barter with each other among my friends or classmates. But that was way back then. Okay, so going back to our discussion proper. History shows that ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, which encompasses the land between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers and is modern day Iraq, parts of eastern Syria, southwest Iran, and southeast Turkey, began to use a system based on the highly coveted coins of gold and silver. And it is known as the bullion. I hope you're familiar with this word. So that thing was known as bullion, which is the purest form of the precious metal. However, bartering remained the most common form of exchange and trade. So gold and silver coins gradually emerged in the use of trading, although the level of pure gold and silver content impacted the coin's value. So only coins that consist of the pure precious metals are bullions. All other coins are referred to as simply as coins. No, it is quite interesting to note that um, gold and silver lasted many centuries as the basis of economic measures and even into relatively recent history of the gold standards, which we'll cover in the next section. However, we have to fast forward, okay, 2000 years and monitoring has been replaced by a currency-based system. So even so, there is, there have been an evolution in the past century alone on how globally the monetary system has evolved from using gold and silver to represent the national wealth and the economic exchange to the current system. So we will now talk about the international monetary system because this is what we are actually following, or this is actually the system that we are using as of the present. So what is international monetary system? Well, actually, it refers to the system and the rules that govern the use and exchange of money around the world between or within and among countries. So each country has its own currency as money, and the international monetary system governs the rules for valuing and exchanging these currencies. So we know for a fact that Philippines has peso, and the U.S. they have their U.S. dollar, and Japan they have yen, France they get franc, and countries among in Europe, if they were adopting the euro, so they are also using the euro dollar. So this monetary system is being used to buy commodities and even services. Okay, however, in putting a value to that one, in regulating the worth of that particular currency has been given to the international monetary system. So the IMS actually is not just about money or currencies. It actually reflects on the economic power and interest because capital is inherently political. And I am not just saying that one. It is actually according to Cohen 2000. So what is then or how did the IMF started? Okay, so for us to be able to appreciate the international monetary system, let us know first what is the IMF. Okay, we know already that this was originally created in 1945 as part of the Bretton Woods Agreement. So it actually attempted to encourage international financial cooperation by introducing a system of convertible currencies at a fixed exchange rates, and the dollar was the redeemable for gold at the time at 35 per ounce. So however, that was way back then. So the International Monetary Fund oversaw the system. For example, a country was free to readjust its exchange rate by up to 10% in either direction, but larger changes required the International Monetary Fund's permission. So then it is the International Monetary Fund serves as or acted as a gatekeeper. So countries were not eligible for membership in the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, a World Bank forerunner that the Bretton Woods Agreement created in order to fund the reconstruction of the continent of Europe after World War II unless they were members of the International Monetary Fund. So since the Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1970s, the International Monetary Fund has promoted the system of floating exchange rates, meaning the market forces determine the value of the currencies, which is relative to one another. So this system continues to exist until now. It is still in place up to this day, up to this very moment, and we are still following this system, which is being enacted to us by the International Monetary Fund. Okay, so I hope you were able to get it. And so that's it. That is our lesson about economic globalization. Thank you for focusing and listening to my discussion. And I hope that you were able to understand everything about economic globalization. Have a good day, everyone. God bless, and always stay safe.